أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح صلوا في رحالكم صلوا في رحالكم الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
The Imam mentioned, the Khatib, the Muaddin said in a couple of words in there, Sallu fi rihalikum, meaning that please pray at home because of the weather conditions, so then next prayers, regular prayers, get prayed at home. You don't have to come to the masjid so that everybody will be safe. Inshallah. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. Verily, all praise are for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise Him and seek His help and seek His forgiveness. Whomsoever Allah guides, no one can misguide him, and whomsoever let go astray because of his own deeds, Allah will not provide help for him. Brothers and sisters, we live in a world today that is quite different from what it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and a little bit longer than that. Technological advances, particularly the internet, has narrowed the world to where now we know about everything and everywhere around the world, good or bad. Within seconds, we know about it. This is great. But it also brought about a hunger for rapid change. And that change is the topic of my khutbah. So today, inshallah, I'll be alluding to some things. And it is, when I compare the norms of the American society today to what it was back then in the 1970s, I find a mixed bag of good and bad things that have happened. One of the good things is the rapid increase in the number of Muslims in this country and the rise of the number of masjids everywhere. And so it is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Muslims are stronger today than they were back then. We have representatives in the federal government, state government, and local governments. Muslims' businesses are, alhamdulillah, thriving, and Muslims are found in nearly every sector of the country. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen for this blessing. Unfortunately, and that's really what to highlight today, it's unfortunate there have also been many huge changes in the country, as I said, especially during these past few years that are not for the better, and they are in direct conflict or contradictions to our religious beliefs and to beliefs in others as well, in other congregations, other religions. Basically, the moral norms of the society is being degraded. What used to be taboo yesterday, it has become fashionable and good today. The spread of drugs or drug use is becoming a huge problem. It is estimated that deaths from opioids use in this country in 2020, 68,600 people died from overdose. 68,630 people died from just opioids, add to it the other drugs. The United States, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the United States went out there and dropped 2 nuclear bombs for killing 2,400, maybe less than 2,500 people. They wiped out nearly 250,000 because they did something, the Japanese did something wrong, and they fought it. Today we have 68,630 people died every year, and there's nothing the government can do to stop it. A few years ago, if someone is caught with an ounce of marijuana or cannabis, they go to jail or they get arrested. Today it is the government that's selling it. Isn't that ironic? That is ironic. The erosion of the family structure is also a very disturbing thing. In today, violence in favor of forming partnerships, they are forming partnerships they call cohabitation. I don't know what that means other than two brats living together. And it is without any marriage contract, without any commitment from one to the other. It has risen, this male and female living together without a marriage contract, it's in just the last few years, it has risen by 230%, almost 2.5 times among the 18 years and older in this country. In fact, 69% of Americans today consider this form of family structure is acceptable. Acceptable. Isn't that ironic? It is quite disturbing that the line between right and wrong is eroding. There's no line anymore. Where in many Western societies they're becoming the norm and not the exception. A good example, in France, where it is illegal for a Muslim woman to wear a hijab, but it is perfectly legal for a non-Muslim woman to walk naked on the beach. Quite an irony in this process. The recent explosion of publicity surrounding the lesbian, gay, and whatever, transformed, whatever you want to call it, including new forms of moral degradation, it's expanding very rapidly, and it is just another form of moral degradation. My neighbor flies the LGBT flag, and he is damning anybody that criticize or reject that flag flying in the neighborhood. Nothing you can do. The Supreme Court of all judicial places, the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. And the media that endorses these practices as normal and label anybody and anyone that rejects them as equivalent to being a racist. I don't watch TV much. On Tuesday, I turned the TV on what turns out to be Wheel of Fortune. I'd like sometime, and I've done it probably more than a year, I've never seen it, but it happened that I turned the TV for no reason, and it was Wheel of Fortune, and there were 2 contestants on that program, a female that seemed to have 2 children. She introduced that she has 2 children, loving children, working for a company, and a guy, a young man, described the joy of his life about his family. He and his husband, a male, he and his husband have adopted a young girl, and he was so happy about that, him and his husband. How do you think this little girl is going to turn out when she gets older? What do you expect for her life to be? When two males living together, one is called my mom and one is called my dad. What is highly disturbing is that many university professors, teachers, administrators, and even clergies in several states have been fired for female transgender, meaning changed her sex to become a male. She refused to be called her, she wants to be called him. And if it's a male, he refused to be called him, he wants to be called her. And what a chaos in the society that we see today. And it's absolutely forbidden and illegal becoming because you call someone, and when you have a teacher that says, I can't call you she when you are he. Look at what happened in athletics. Some females, some males that are just as strong as any young male wants to participate in running with females. So they end up glorified as being the best female in the world, that she can run really fast when in fact he is just as male as any other male. A lady that was caught, and just not about this, even about drugs, the lady that was caught in Russia, with a vial of drugs with cannabis oil, she was arrested. Well, the U.S. made every effort to release her, and she came back, and the only thing that hasn't happened to her is she didn't meet the president, and they didn't have a carnival for her when she came back. She came back as a hero. A baker shop owner in Colorado, I think it's North Carolina, two males coming in and they want them to decorate a cake for their wedding because they're going to get married and they want a cake with two of them holding hands. What a society, and where do we go? Well, this is what's going on in the society, and we're part of it. Well, most of these practices, we can say as Muslims, are in the West. I regret to say that they are creeping into Muslim societies and Muslim cultures. I know of at least one family that their child chose this route, and there's nothing they can do about it because they didn't reach and teach this kid from a very young age. So we look at this even in Muslim countries. Okay? A friend of mine sent me a video, in fact, ironically last week, of a female young lady in her 20s from the country, I can even name the country, from Tunisia. She is going on their net, and she was so excited she's going to marry two men. Okay, look at it, what's happening. But then the government didn't do anything to stop it. Okay, she's on YouTube. The Tunisian government, and I'm saying Tunisia just because I'm close to where I grew up, and I love that country, I've been there several times. The Tunisian government in 1982 passed a law regarding inheritance. Any Tunisian male that dies and doesn't leave a will, what he left behind, whatever things he left behind, is divided equally between males and females. And it's been approved. And so now the male and female, in inheritance, they have equal amounts, even though the Quran stated very clearly what the share of the male and female, and that's not just haphazardly done. If the father dies and leaves his will, the kids gets their share evenly, but then the female has no obligation in Islam. She can take her money, take it home with her husband, spend it, her kids do whatever, but the son is required by the Islamic law to take care of his parents. When an older man came to the Prophet and said, my son ignored me, he took the son with his garment and pulled him and said, you and your father belong to your dad. That in the Tunisian government or in Muslim countries, that doesn't go anywhere because their legislators approve it. Isn't that ironic? So it is very disturbing that some of the things that we see today that's happening in the West is creeping its way to our society. Look at another example. We can blame the internet, but there is pressure within some Muslim governments to open up their societies to the ills of Western culture under false pretense of modernization or modernism. There's also pressure from Western countries like the U.S. to spread these practices. A good example of the pressure from the United States and countries that reject these practices when President Obama, of all people, visited Kenya in 2012. He voiced his pleasure with the Kenyan government for installing a law that forbids homosexuality. He said, no, we have to give gay rights their rights. They deserve their rights, and we are a modern world. Well, it's, you know, in 2014, Western countries threatened Uganda, if it doesn't abolish laws that reject homosexuality, they're going to cut their aids. Okay? And that forced the Ugandan government to abandon that law. I think one of the ministers of Ethiopia, I believe, said, we have more problems than we have to deal with. We have people that are hungry. We need help with food, and you don't bring us, if you have culture, things that are new in your society and your culture, don't spread it to us. We have more serious problems than to have to worry about homosexuality. So it's a world that we're living in today that's basically a very disturbing moral issue that we deal with. The Quran is very clear in rejecting deviant practices like homosexuality, paganism, drug use, and other unlawful practices. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قُلْ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ وَالْإِثْمَ وَالْبَغْيَ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ وَأَن تُشْرِكُوا بِاللَّهِ مَا لَمْ يُنَزِّلْ بِهِ سُلْطَانًا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَأَن تَقُولُوا from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In Surah Al-A'raf, and Surah Al-An, with the Jahilun, whatever, Jahala. So it is very important that we have to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed their village for being ignorant of following Allah's practices. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam rejected anything that a male does or say that makes him emulate a female, and vice versa.